Welcome to the Shaman Stories podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today with me I have Jay Cuskar, who is the owner and practitioner at ASC Therapy. Welcome, Jay. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Jeremy. This is pretty exciting you're doing this work.
Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about what you do today?
Currently, I'm working as a psychedelic therapist. I work with legal, licensed psilocybin therapy, and I'm also working in a ketamine clinic once a week. So I served as in community health as a therapist for many years and was working in Spokane, Washington when Oregon started voting on it, and I started researching it. COVID had hit, so I was seeing clients daily online and not having interactions with people at all. And I started reading about psychedelics and doing the MAPS training and the studies with that, with MDMA and psilocybin, and started reading the research and recognizing that people are making progress where they hadn't with typical medications or traditional therapies. And I'd worked with clients for several years that were making no progress. And it was just like they were stuck.
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing about psilocybin is that it really helps people get unstuck.
No, I agree, and I'm a total advocate of it. And my own experience, we mentioned before the recording, it's a quicker path as long as you have the right facilitator and the right guides with you. It can be a lot of times people can get true healing within one ceremony.
Yes, yes, I've had that. I've sat with people that went, wow, that was 10 years of therapy in 6 hours.
And so, but before we dive deep into that, which I really do want to do, I want to talk about your journey and how you got to where you are. So, what was your childhood like, for young Jay?
I grew up in Montana on a farm, so very connected with nature. And always have been. I would consider myself an animist, believing in connection with everything and Native American philosophy that all my relations, like brother bear, sister deer, all of that, Tibetan Buddhism, we are all connected. All of that's been a part of my life. And then I moved to California and was exposed to diversity and different ideas and got into drum circles, which is probably where I had my first non ordinary state of consciousness, where I would transcend and feel myself in another state. So, and then in 2000, I was living in California and had cancer. So I had a gallery in Sutter Creek, California at that point, and kind of wanted to figure out the role that I had played in the manifestation of my disease and my cancer. So I closed the gallery and went back to school, got my master's, and then started working as a therapist to help people find out the roles that they play in their own dysfunction or disease or disorder or whatever it is. And then when I was living in Spokane, Washington, as I mentioned earlier, everything started opening up, and I moved to Oregon. I worked in community health for a year in Vancouver, Washington, but lived in Oregon, and then eventually went and did the training with the first cohort that graduated worldwide. I mean, this is worldwide. Oregon is the only place that is doing this currently. Colorado's on the way to do it, and I'm just got certified to be able to practice in Colorado too. Washington is on its way. We had a representative come and talk at one of the conferences about the work that he's doing to get it going. But I was working and after I worked in community health in Vancouver, I started working with a private group practice here in Portland, and was doing that. But then when I started working when the service centers opened in August of 2023, I switched over and started working with psychedelics completely. And I've been really busy doing that since then. And since August of 23, I've worked with almost 200 clients with people from around the world.
And with that, did you ever do like mushroom journeys on your own before that, or did you just kind of fall into it? I'm
I
just curious.
did. I did. My first mushroom journey was in California, and I don't know what the dosage was. I just did it with some friends, and it was not a good journey. The rocks turned into the rocks at the stream turned into lizards and started running away. And then later, having dinner, the chicken they were cooking looked like embryos, and I couldn't eat it. But I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't educated about it, and I have no idea what the dosage was then.
Mhm.
With the knowledge that I have now, it's so different. And then when I moved to Portland, I started trying other psychedelics and really opened my mind to that. I grew up in the 70s and 80s and have images of the fried egg in the pan. This is
Mhm.
your brain on drugs.
I remember those as well.
Yeah. And I still have that image in my head. I mean, it's very clear right now. But then I started understanding the differences of using it in therapy and recognizing the validity of it and the efficacy of it. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a really big key point there. It's recreational is one thing, but actual true therapy is a whole nother
mhm.
ball game. And you really have to be with any plant medicine or psychedelic medicine. I mean, even there's even some cultures that use marijuana as a way to do journeys and
Yes.
healing and therapy. And
Well,
all
tobacco and alcohol were also used as sacred ritual in ceremonies too at one point.
yeah, and we've lost that connection, realizing that they're here to help versus escapism, I like to call it. Because I did that as a kid too, of oh, we'd get a gram of mushrooms, eat them, and then go walk around the city, and we'd feel connected to everything, but we didn't really understand what was going on. Everything just looked really cool. It was
Right.
plasma, you know. I didn't
Yeah.
have anything turning into lizards or embryos like you did, but our doses were very small. It was like 1 gram, that's your standard recreational dose, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
And so with that, how do you go about doing your work with clients? Because I'm actually very curious on that too. From I've done ceremonies, with like the shamanic perspective where you have the shaman or the practitioner, there guiding you. They'll be there in case something happens. They might clear evil spirits away. They might do a clearing on you or help move some energy so that the memories can help flow better and you can do some purging, those kind
Mhm.
of things. But I am curious how it works with a quote unquote Western therapy mixture into it.
Well, the clinical model is if somebody would approach me curious about it. Sometimes it's a referral from a licensed service center in Portland or Oregon, and then we do introductory sessions. And I do those on Google Meet. We meet each other and see if we're a good fit.
Mhm.
I discuss what they're looking for, answer any questions, assess, kind of do a mental health assessment
Mhm.
without following the rules and regulations of that. And then if we do decide to work together, I always leave that up to the client. Wait for the client to say, yeah, let's work together. It sounds like you'll be able to help me. Then we set up preparation sessions. And the first thing that we do is reserve the room at the center. And there's no fees going forward. We want people to be really committed. And they could change their mind all the way up to like the tea being prepared before they go into their journey, and they wouldn't be charged anything because we really want people to be invested in this work. It's not easy work. And then the preparation sessions, before we start doing those, I send them all of the forms. There's a ton of forms. The state is doing a really good job with that. And I always joke with clients when they're finished, when they're finished with the paperwork and I've signed off on my part, I say, well, I hope you're happy with your new home because it almost feels like you're buying a house. But the state is doing that to show the efficacy of it and to show the validity of the work. And then we set up preparation sessions and we go deeper into the history of the person. A lot of times, people will go into their journey and meet their inner child, where the wound started, where they first felt like they were broken. And we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about setting up an intention. An intention going into the work and the treatment in particular is really important. And the metaphor that I use for the intention is what do you want the mushroom to decompose?
Mhm.
Because that's what mushrooms do. What do you want it to shift in relationship with something that's causing you dis-ease in your life or dysfunction or is driving you too much? And then we meet at the service center on the day that they've reserved the room. When I sit as a facilitator, it's completely non-directive. I don't use any therapy at all. I guide the client by encouraging them to do their own inner journey work. And that's all I do. I help them keep warm. I help them navigate to the restroom, get water, keep the music going in the earphones, a blindfold on, to encourage to be an inner journey. But I also write down notes. I write down every movement, everything that they do during the journey. And then we talk about that later when they come out of it, when they get home again. And we do integration sessions and we make meaning out of it. And they talk about how they recognize there are changes in their life or how their family members have responded and gone, well, something happened to you, which is always happens. And then we make meaning out of it. And when people invest in working with me, I'm invested in working with them, and they can have integration sessions a year from now. If something happens to them and they go, gosh, I wonder if this is mushroom related, I want to talk to Jay about it. Then we meet again, and there's no additional fees with that for me. This is not about money for me. The money is good, but it's more about raising the collective consciousness.
Mhm.
And I'm so thrilled when I get people coming from Florida or Texas or places that are pretty close in my mind about things like this, because I recognize that in expanding that client's consciousness, that's going to ripple out to all of their relationships.
Yeah, we have that same mindset. We call it like whenever you're working on yourself, you're helping 7 generations ahead of you and 7 generations
Yes,
behind you.
yes,
And it's just that, like you said, that ripple effect that just you don't need to worry about working on Uncle Joe or Aunt Patty. It's work on yourself, and then they'll start matching your frequency and they'll start working on themselves. And they might not even realize it at a certain time. And I've had even doing the shamanic work, I'll work with a client and then over time their parents or their family will notice the change and then they'll start doing their own inner work.
right, right. It inspires them.
Yeah, it's crazy to watch and it's a great thing to see. And with that, like we talked about it a little bit earlier too. One thing I noticed when I was seeing people go to Oregon, they were getting like they were doing microdosing and the one person they went to, they were getting like the synthetic version of like ayahuasca, synthetic version of mushrooms. I personally don't feel that's a great mix. I feel like it needs to be the actual
I
plant.
agree. I agree. And fungi was one of the first inhabitants of the planet. That's one of the things I really do work with people to educate them on. I suggest that they watch Fantastic Fungi
Excuse me.
and they pay particular attention to the mycelium, which covers most of the earth. And the purpose of the mycelium, the mushroom is the fruit of the mycelium. The purpose of the mycelium is to communicate with other plants and trees and to take nutrients and water back and forth and to maintain the health of the environment. And I feel like that when people do it in treatment, that's what it does in a person's body. It helps connect the disconnected parts, especially with trauma.
Mhm. And do you find a specific species or type of mushroom works better than another for different symptoms? So like, you have there's so many versions out there nowadays where there's like
Oh
golden
my gosh, yeah.
teacher, there's golden teacher and B plus are usually your standard that you see everywhere, but there's like Watu, which was used by the lady in Mexico, Anna Maria, I want to say her name was.
Maria Sabina.
Yeah, Maria Sabina.
Yeah, I love her. And I recently tried a strain of that and it was incredibly powerful. But that's not the kind that we can use in Oregon.
Okay. So you're limited on certain strains basically.
Certain strains, right? And they have to go through a licensed manufacturer, a producer, and then they're sent to a licensed lab too. There's only one lab in Oregon that tests all of it. And what we work with is the psilocin content, the analytical breakdown of the psilocin content, which is the psychoactive component that we want the client to get. So the higher the psilocin content, usually the deeper the journey and the more accessible trauma becomes for them.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. And then you mentioned you sit with them, so you don't partake at the same time they are, because there's some like when you do ayahuasca, and I've been to some other shamanic ceremonies where the shaman or the facilitator is actually taking them as well in order to connect deeper with the client.
Yeah, in the treatment model, we're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
In fact, there has to be a licensed worker, certified worker in the room watching to make sure that the facilitator doesn't take it, but it's more important to watch and make sure that the client consumes the whole product.
Interesting.
And the facilitators aren't allowed to touch the product at all.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I don't know if it's to avoid that or not, but maybe it's more to assure the consumer, the client, that the facilitator is not going to be in an altered state too. And
I mean, and yeah, I could see how that makes a lot of sense from this standpoint because there's a lot of training that goes on, even to be a facilitator on the, yeah, I'm going to keep saying shamanic side, but like the indigenous cultures down in Peru and stuff, they go years of training, learning how to work with ayahuasca or the mushroom before they even can facilitate a ceremony. And so that makes a lot more sense too, because I was always curious how you guys do it versus the other way of doing it. I don't I don't think one way is right versus the other. I'm just
I don't either. I don't either. Yeah. And I think the reason that they do that in indigenous cultures is to create a relationship with the medicine, which is what I encourage clients to do with it, to educate themselves. I also encourage them to watch on Netflix How to Change Your Mind, all of Michael Pollan's series on that. The first one's on LSD and the third one's on psilocybin.
Mhm.
And the more educated and the more aware clients become before they come and do the treatment, the more easy it is for them to slide into the journey and to relax. The metaphors that I use with it is to think of yourself laying in a canoe and going back and with the flow. Just
Mhm.
lay back and go with the flow, whatever comes to you. Welcome everything that comes to you with beginner's mind, some curiosity, some joy. About three-quarters of the way through in most people's journey, they have an extreme sense of gratitude and recognize all the blessings and the supportive people in their lives. And they come out of it stronger because of that.
Mhm. And do you have to worry about SSRIs or any other type of medications, things like that?
Lithium is absolutely a no.
Okay.
Lithium can cause seizures. So somebody has to be off lithium for 30 days. If someone's on SSRIs, we encourage them to work with their prescriber to titrate down on it to lower the dosage. But if they're not able to do that, then that just means more psilocybin because the psilocybin kind of works the same way that an SSRI would.
Mhm. Yeah, I've
So it
actually
is doable.
okay. Yeah, I've actually used microdosing techniques with shamanic clearing to help people get off of SSRIs. And it takes time, and I tell them always like work with your doctor, let them know what you're doing,
Mm.
because I am not a doctor or a professional. You need to taper off these things because I've seen people go, family members go cold turkey off SSRIs, and it's not pretty.
No, it isn't, and it can cause suicide ideation for some people too. I'm really concerned about the person that's taking over the Center for Healthcare right now because they're very antidepressants, very much against antidepressants, and wants to put people in camps to help them reduce their antidepressant use. And I think it's really going to cause a lot of problems for many people.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast. Not going there, not touching any other politics stuff. This is about happiness.
Right, right, right. Growth
Yeah.
and yeah.
But so with that, when you do the ceremonies with them, you mentioned music. Is there like a specific type of music you do? Like one I like is a guy named John Hopkins.
Yes, yes.
He does very good like psychedelic journey music.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
and Maps
amazing.
uses him a lot for their work too. So
Okay.
yeah, I definitely have him. It's a soundtrack, but I always tell the clients that you are the navigator of this journey. When they decide to work with me, I tell them your journey's already started. So be awake and aware of the things that are going to come to you now in this process because they could be part of your journey. They could open you up further. But when you're in your journey, also you're the navigator. So take care of yourself, be assertive, and ask for what you need. If you don't like a song, let me know, and it can be changed. If you don't like the soundtrack, that can be changed too. I usually have a really good sense of where a client is at in their journey. And sometimes I'll actually change the music intentionally to take them further into. Like I'll put on some psych chill music, which is very techno and can take them
Mhm.
really deep into it, depending upon the person.
Do you guys ever do group work? So would you take like a couple or I mean, obviously I don't think you're going to have like 20 people in the room, but would you do like couple therapy or anything like that or family groups?
I've done both, and I love working with family systems too. Usually, what I do with people is if I'm working with a couple, I like to sit with them individually first, and then and people have come from out of state like Florida and
Mhm.
Texas to do this work together. So I'll sit with one couple one day and the other one the next day, and then the third day we do the work together. And the reason I do them individually is because when you're in an altered state of consciousness, you can pick up other people's feelings. And
Mhm.
like in a group setting, you may feel some huge depression coming at you. If you don't have experience with the medicine to begin with, you might think it's your own. But if you have experience and you go, okay, I feel this, then you can let go and you can release it and send some healing energy to whoever is experiencing that. And within group ceremonies, there is often a collective sense of something
Mhm.
that comes up, like a collective theme that runs through it.
Yeah.
I also suggest to people to do a hero's journey first before they do microdosing,
Mhm.
because microdosing, the theory behind it, I understand it, is to keep those neural pathways open. It could be beneficial for some people to do it just to see how their body responds to it, but microdosing is only a tenth or a 20th of what they do in the hero's journey. And usually you don't want to have visual changes or hallucinations with the microdose. It's just kind of a maintenance thing.
Yeah.
And so the Silicon Valley has been doing microdose Fridays for like decades. So that's where a lot of the creative ideas came from.
Yeah, it can both can really shift your personality and your reality. But yeah, definitely the heroes dose. And that was going to be my next question of when they come into a ceremony, what is the average dose?
Usually start with 25 milligrams, which is a psychoanalytical breakdown of the psilocin. So it's really interesting. Their clients are able to look at a package. It's all packaged. It's very much like the cannabis
Mhm.
industry, I imagine, and all of it's broken down so they can look at the package. Generally, if it comes whole, I have them hold it to smell it to remind them of, if it see if it reminds them of anything. One woman said, "Oh gosh, it reminds me of my grandmother's cookie." Guess who showed up in the journey? Grandma showed up. Another person said, "Well, it reminds me of my dog who had passed away a year before," and of course the dog showed up. But many people just go, "Wow, it smells like the earth," and they have very grounded, centered journeys. So a lot of that, all of the scents really become amplified with it. Sight, sound, taste, all of that becomes amplified with the psilocybin.
Nice. And you said you mix it into like a tea. They're not just eating
We
stems and
usually make
caps
it
or
as a tea.
okay.
And there's kind of a nice ritual that we can create around that because they'll get to hold it, and then the worker comes in and puts it in a grinder and grinds it up, and then we let it steep for 8 minutes, and I have a timer that I set for that. And at that time, the client usually holds the tea, stirs it, watches it change color because it becomes bluer and more purple, which is a psilocin that's in it. And I often encourage people to give it some reverence and respect
Mhm.
because it's been around for thousands of years, helping people expand their consciousness. And the more the people have a sense of relating to the mushroom, the better their journey they have. I've sat with people that go in their journey, they've gone, oh, the mushroom's telling me to do this, or the mushroom's telling me to do that. Or when I tap them on the shoulder about an hour and a half through to see if they want to do a boost, which is an additional usually 9 or 10 milligrams,
Mhm.
then sometimes they'll say, yeah, the mushroom's telling me we need to go deeper. And the reason we do the boost is really to get into the darkness, the areas that people are avoiding, and to allow them to release the things that they've been suppressing.
Yeah, I've done many ceremonies like that too. Especially I've done more ayahuasca in the beginning than now I'm working more with the mushroom. But it'd be every time, like right when I feel like the journey's done, I would ask, like, should I take another dose? And Mama I would be like, yeah, you should take another one. Or sometimes she'd be like, no, you're done. Like, no more.
Yeah.
The mushroom's kind of the same way. It's like, no more. And then usually at that moment, the facilitator's like, who wants a second dose? It's almost every single time that happens right before they ask who wants the second dose.
Mhm.
And with mushroom, in the beginning, I found it a lot harder to let go than ayahuasca. Ayahuasca was almost like lay down, boom, you're in. Mushroom, because it has that buildup.
The waves.
Yeah, the waves. It just
That's
takes a
why I'm
little
wearing this.
bit more.
That's why I'm wearing this jacket today. That's the wave analogy is what I use for clients. That it comes in waves, including the symptoms. You may get nauseous a little bit. You may start yawning. You may get chills, but all of those come as waves that ebb and flow. And the way that I work with nausea during my journey is that I get excited because I know that it's going to launch me further into it. And it's like, okay, up the roller coaster and down into it further. And when people recognize that and they tell themselves that, it's so interesting. Even though people are in an altered state of consciousness, they're still aware of what's going on around them. And that baffles a lot of people. Like, how can I be in this other world, but I'm still aware of what's out here? And then, of course, we talk about, well, all those realities exist all the time, but you're just in an altered state. You're seeing them now.
Yeah, and that goes back to that setting too, like knowing that you're safe, knowing that you're taken care of, so you don't get that paranoia, that nervousness of, oh, is someone going to walk in that shouldn't be here or whatever? Is someone going to hurt me? It's harder for you to truly relax and be in the moment where you need to be because a lot of times when you're fully in it, your eyes are closed, but it's like you're walking in a meadow with the sun. You're talking to people, you're seeing things happen. You're One time I did a mushroom ceremony and I asked, I was like, where did you come from? And the way it was shown to me was like the mushroom was seeded onto the earth to help us. There was like these giant ships and just basically dropping seeds all over the earth, and everywhere it landed, mushrooms would start to grow and then connect with each other all over the earth. It was just a crazy, and I think I do believe part of that was my own brain interpreting how it needed to get the message across. Do I know if a real spaceship showed up? I don't know, maybe. But it was the
It,
message of we were
really,
sent here to help, you know.
it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's one of the things that mushrooms help too. It helps you step back and be the witness, the observer, and not so wrapped up in the emotional, and that creates space for us to be able to work with things.
So with that, without getting into details of, who and names and stuff, what was mo one of the most like life transformative experience you saw with a client? If you can talk about whatever it's allowed to talk about, I guess.
When I was preparing for this, I was thinking about a client, especially because you were talking about PTSD with veterans. I worked with someone from the East Coast who came out to work, and they were in the Pentagon in 911,
Mhm.
and they lost 18 of their friends that day. And they went into the trauma, and they've come out of it, and they're able to deal with it. It's not as pervasive in their life as it was anymore. They're learning how to accept it and to be with it and to recognize. And I've also sat with a young person who came out of the journey and said, you know what, I just realized that I'm not the reason my trauma happened to me. People have been telling me that for 10 years, but I didn't know that. And the neural pathway that solidified that for him was opened by the psilocybin.
Nice. Yeah, and I guess with the more severe cases, so the guy who was at the Pentagon, did he have to come back for multiple ceremonies, or he was just kind of like one and I
It
had it?
just, it totally cleared it out for him,
Nice.
which is not common. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes, especially with a lot of trauma and a lot of issues, substance use, all those things, people are encouraged, or the mushroom will tell them to come back again and to do more. I
Nice.
also think of it like as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a pyramid.
Mhm.
where you start at the bottom and you're working on the environment and structure and foundation and food and nurturing and stuff, and then you can work up towards self-actualization. The people that come back, I feel like they're uh, rising higher on the pyramid towards self-actualization, and new things open up for them every time they come back.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree with that because it's a journey. I mean,
Life is.
yeah, it's all a big journey.
Yeah.
And with your training, did you have to sit with the mushroom multiple times and learn how to connect with it? How does the state do its training for you as a facilitator?
Oh, it was really interesting. It's totally changed now because there are licensed facilitators in Oregon. When I did the training, there weren't any. So when we did practicum to complete the training, we had the option of going to Mexico to work with indigenous people there with the mushroom, or to do holotropic breath work, or to do ketamine. And I had no experience with ketamine. I've done holotropic, and I really didn't want to go to Mexico to work with the medicine because I've worked with the medicine for a while. So I went and did ketamine here in Oregon at a site, Rainfall Medicine, where I actually work now once a week and work with it. And I was hesitant to work with ketamine because I thought it was a synthetic. It's an anesthetic, and it takes people, it dissociates, has people dissociate when they're on it. But the doctor that I work with said, "Well, no, there's a fungi that creates ketamine."
Nice.
So I kind of went, "Okay, I
I
can
always
work
thought it
with."
was a chemical too. I didn't realize it was actual a plant.
Yeah. So, well, but I imagine most chemical medicines have some biological factor, like aspirin comes from aspen trees, I think, or poplar, or one of the trees it comes from, and so nature provides medicine, let thy food be thy medicine.
Yeah.
Right back to that again. And so I was on board with that. And ketamine is a completely different journey. It can be more expensive than psilocybin treatment because you need to commit to like 6 journeys is what they request to really get the full treatment out of it. But it can be extremely beneficial too, and can work with PTSD and trauma as well.
And do you find one works better than another based upon a person's symptoms or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I feel like for me, psilocybin is the one.
okay.
And I just think because it's more grounding, it's more centering, it really brings people into their body. Ketamine has a way of taking people out. When I did my journey with it, I describe it as being an illusion, and the whole matrix is going by as I was just shot down into this matrix of all these things going by in the sides. And every once in a while, I would take a little journey into a side pocket and work on something in my mind, and then I would shoot back into it and back down. Ketamine is about a 45-minute journey, and the minimum that psilocybin journeys are would be 4 hours, and that's just with a 25 milligram. If we go higher with it, it's generally 6 hours. So I start working with the client probably at 9:30 in the morning. We're finished by 4:30 or 5. After we after they come out of a little bit and we start processing. And I usually try to get people out when it's daylight out because they'll still be everything will be amplified and it'll still be really beautiful.
And so I want to just back up to the ketamine stuff because I see that all the time at stores, at least here in Washington. I'll see it at the gas station. Is that the same as what you guys do with the therapy, or is that like some different version, or do you just not know? I've always been
I think the one you're seeing in the stores is kratom.
that okay, there you go.
Yeah, and that's a completely different thing. That's a plant. But the thing with ketamine is that it can be addictive, and so that's an issue. Psilocybin has 0% possibility of becoming addictive.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's where I was getting the confusion of because I think ketamine was designed or started to be used to help people get off of heroin.
Could be.
I think originally, maybe, and then they found other uses for it versus psilocybin. That's just always been. It'd be nice if it was more out there and more people could get access to it. Like you mentioned here in Washington, they're trying to deregulate it. I think in Tacoma and Seattle, you can have a certain number of grams on you. Obviously, you can't sell it and you can't facilitate a ceremony, but you can have it on your person. That's about as far as they take it at this point. You're not allowed to take it, you're not allowed to sell it, but you can carry it. It's like, okay. And I
Yeah.
want to say ayahuasca is kind of the same thing too. Is like you could have it on you, but you're not allowed to do anything with it. If you have it, it's fine. You just can't be on it.
So kind of decriminalize a little bit, but
Yeah.
not, yeah. Yeah.
And I think what you guys are doing is truly important because I think it's needed. I mean, I've seen the benefits of it. Being a veteran myself, I didn't use mushrooms for mine per se, but over time it has helped weed out the little things that I might not have worked on.
Mhm.
Same with ayahuasca. Plant medicine in general, I'm a big advocate for, and I think we need to be more
Yeah.
open to having it. But I do think we need to make sure there's some regulations. I don't think it needs to be 100% locked down, but you need to make sure that the people facilitating know what they're doing. And it's the same problem I've seen in Peru and other places where everybody can open up an ayahuasca shop and do ceremonies, and you'll have these big retreats with like 50 people in a room, one guy who might know a little bit about it facilitating, and then a bunch of helpers who have no clue what's going on.
Yeah.
That's just a dangerous mix. You need to have
And
people who are
often
familiar.
there's no integration afterwards. So there's no way of communicating and making meaning out of it and
Exactly.
sharing the symbolism and metaphors that come to you. And, you know, and
Yeah.
this integration is required. A client can refuse to do it. They could just say, I don't need it, but that rarely happens.
Yeah, integration's super important with all these type of treatments. If you don't follow up and integrate what you've learned, you're just going to repeat the same patterns and go back into the same state. And you see that a lot with people coming back from ceremonies. They'll be like, oh, I saw this, I've worked on this, I know what's going on with this. Life is great. And then they go back to the same job, the same mindset. Eventually within a month, they're back to the way they were. They haven't truly addressed it. They had the inspiration, they had the insights, but they didn't act on it and make the changes that were necessary.
Yeah.
Those changes can be super hard to make.
Oh, it
You
can.
have
It
your
can. Yep. And that's one of the things we talk about psilocybin. I tell people that the overarching theme that I hear people come out of the journeys is I haven't allowed myself to be authentic. And then we break that down. When you were born, you were gendered. And that means there's certain things that boys can do and girls can do and things that you shouldn't do. And then sibling order puts you in different roles with different expectations. School puts you in roles and expectations. Relationships put you in roles and expectations. Jobs and all those things. And a lot of people meet those expectations so they don't lose that relationship. But inside, many of us are going, this isn't authentic for me. This is not who I really am. I'm just doing this because it's expected of me. And I think for many people, that is the source of depression and anxiety, that innate sense of I'm not being impeccable with who I am.
yeah, and I get those questions a lot. People come to me, and that's honestly what kind of helped inspire this podcast too, is a lot of people would come to me and go, I don't know what my life purpose is. I
Right.
don't know what I should be doing.
Especially if you experience trauma.
Yeah. And
All
it
of that shuts down.
and it's me trying to work with them going, well, I can't tell you what to be. We can work on clearing the things that are blocking you. I can tell you a little bit about how I do things, but my path isn't necessarily your path.
Mhm.
You can do shamanic work and practices on your own and not call yourself a shaman and help other people. You can just work on yourself. That's too easy. You could also do Reiki. You could do what you're doing as a therapist and eventually doing psilocybin therapy. Each person has their own unique gifts and paths that are truly for them and make them happy. We do have a reason we're here.
Mhm.
They just don't have to look the same. You can be a quote unquote healer path and do many different ways of healing people.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it's just letting people talk to you and get out their emotions and their grief,
Yes.
and then that's it. Then you just walk away.
Especially if they feel like they've been heard and validated.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's the first time they've ever felt like that. Yeah. Many people grow up feeling like their needs aren't met, they're not seen and perceived for what they need, so they think that there's something wrong with them. They take it personal. There's something wrong with me. People aren't understanding what I need, and they're not providing what I need. And
Yeah, and some of that's also taking responsibility for your own self too of okay, well, mom and dad's not giving me what I need. You know, I'm in my 20s now. Maybe I need to figure out what I can do to facilitate those needs myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's harder obviously when you're 6, 10, 15, but at
And
some point you got to let go of the past.
and at that age, your brain's not fully developed either. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And so when you do integration with people, do you just meet them online? Is it more they have to come back to you in person? Is there a certain number of sessions?
We do Google Meet,
Okay,
and the number of sessions is up to them.
nice.
It could be 10 sessions. It could be just one or two. It really depends upon where they're at. But I'm open for that with no additional fees to meet them as they need.
Nice. And that's more, and that becomes more of a, I guess, quote unquote, talk therapy part where you're just talking through what happened and maybe things that came up later. Because that's one thing I've experienced too is things pop up later. You could be 30 days in out of the ceremony and some new insight just hits you when you're not expecting it, or some
Oh,
person
oh,
you haven't seen that entire time shows up and you're like, oh, that's what the mushroom was talking about.
right, exactly. And sometimes people need integration just to validate it. Like I'll go over the notes. Remember you said this. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And then I tell them to find where they're holding that in their body. Because if the body can keep a score of trauma, the body keeps a score. I'm sure you're familiar with that book.
Oh yeah.
The body can also keep the score of peacefulness and calmness that's inside of us. And I really teach people or try to encourage people to tap into their inner wisdom. Psychedelics help people attain their inner healing intelligence, which we all innately have, but nobody's ever taught that. The body innately knows how to heal itself. The mind knows how to heal itself and to work on it. And psychedelics can open the possibility and the potential to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned the hierarchy of needs. I look at it too of a pyramid, but with a mind, body, and spirit. You know, for me, spirit's at the baseline. You know, when you start working on that, then you start clearing things out of the body and then clearing things out of the mind. It's this whole pyramid right there.
Yeah,
Then you get the
yeah.
true healing.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
And with that, so what, I guess, if somebody can't see you and do mushrooms, what advice would you give to somebody who might be having issues or needing to work through something? Is there other techniques or practices that they could start with? You mentioned breath work a little bit earlier, but is there other things they can do or examples of that breath work, you know, as they get ready to perhaps come all the way to use? Maybe they're in Florida or Germany or wherever, and you know, they can't just show up tomorrow.
There's all kinds of tools. One of the things that I send when I send the forms for people is an article by a Canadian facilitator. And he talks about setting your intention and the reasons for setting that. And it could go all the way back to childhood for that. But he also includes a meditation on it to help you prepare for your journey.
Nice. And then with that, I guess, has there been any surprises for you along this way? Because it didn't sound like, I mean, you were doing drum circles and things like that and out of body experiences, kind of, you know, going into that altered state. But has there been any surprises with you working with the mushroom the way you have been for yourself? Like insights maybe you didn't know about yourself that you've learned now along the way.
Well, I feel like I've been on every journey with every client. Every person that I've worked with, something comes up inside me at the same time
Mhm.
that I recognize. And I think the most surprising thing is really how truly connected we are. And I think of the mycelium web reaching out and connecting us and pulling people in to work with me to approach the service center that they do that referred them to me and all of the things that bring all of that together. And
Nice.
you know, it's extremely validating and affirming. And I think that's what most people need coming into this work is validation. And a lot of people come out of the journey. In fact, recently, I think probably 3 or 4 in a row have come out of the journey, and they've said that ancestors or guides have come to them.
Mhm.
They said, "You're a good person. You're worthy." And they needed to hear that. A lot of people go into the journeys and they end up doing multi-generational historical trauma work.
Mhm.
We all carry that. And part of it is because trauma is put in a binary system where it's so bad, it's so evil. Religion teaches us that the devil's in there, the devil's in the darkness, don't go in there. But with the work, I encourage people to go into there, to allow themselves to go into the darkness. There could be gold in there. There could be the answers for the reason of your depression. There could be answers how you could work with your PTSD to shift your relationship with it. So it's not dominating, it's not overpowering your life and coming up in moments when you're not being traumatized, to find those answers in there. And I also tell people that you might go in there and you might find a dark, scary monster, but I would encourage you to befriend that monster because it may have been there protecting you since childhood
Mhm.
and keeping a good job, but it's rearing its head when you're not being traumatized anymore, when you're not in danger. So say, thank you for being there, but could you back off a little bit and let me take over the driver's seat? Don't leave me completely because I want you to be there when I truly am in danger. But just let me take over a bit. I'm an adult now and I want to do this. And a lot of people in their journeys have recognized that maybe their purpose is to break that multi generational historical cycle of trauma, addiction, or whatever it is that is prevalent in the family system.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess, and that would be interesting to see too, bringing in families and having them do a group journey together, like you mentioned earlier, and seeing that interaction. I've never done it. I've been in journeys with family members, but I've never done like a whole family. It's usually like maybe a brother, sister, husband, wife. And it's like you said, there's usually a common theme in those group ceremonies that you don't go into it seeing it, but then when everybody starts sharing their journeys, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, that was yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, you did that too. Okay. And then same with the music, like you mentioned the music earlier. Sometimes I'll be in journeys like, why are they playing this song right now? And then we'll come out of it and we'll do the group share. And it's like, oh, when you played that song, it just hit me like a brick and it brought me back to when I was 3. And it's like, oh, that song was for that person. And then this song was for me. And, and the music, I think the music plays a really vital part when you do
It does.
work.
It does. And some people ask if they can bring in their own soundtrack. And I usually discourage that by saying, well, it'll be all familiar to you. It won't take you to new areas in your mind. It won't take you a couple of days ago. I was working with a client, and in the middle of their journey, they were going, "Oh, this is so profound! It's so profound!" And I looked down at the soundtrack that was playing, and the song that was playing was called "Profound." I haven't told the client that yet because we haven't done integration, but there's just some connection, and music holds a place in people's mind that is there forever. I did my clinical internship with the elderly, and some of the people that couldn't put sentences together, if I started singing "You Are My Sunshine," they could sing all of the words of it.
Nice.
The brain holds a memory of music like nothing else.
So speaking of the elderly, so it sounds like you've worked with them. Has that helped with, um, I guess for the most part, preparation of death, letting go of things before they know they're going to die, or maybe even with like Alzheimer's or anything like that? Has it helped in those areas?
I'm so glad you asked that because I'm actually in a lawsuit right now requesting accommodations for people in palliative care or end of life to be able to go into their homes and work with the medicine.
Nice.
Because studies have shown that working with the medicine, people lose their fear of dying. They recognize that we really don't die. We just return to the source of everything and they connect with that source of everything. And they recognize that I'm just going to return to that. It's really, really beneficial. But the problem with that, I worked as a hospice bereavement counselor for a couple of years when I lived in Texas. And the same thing happens with the psilocybin that's going to happen with hospice is that people wait too long to get hospice care. So the person is failing. I was scheduled to work with a client for the lawsuit to show the efficacy of it, and the client waited too long, and then health became So there wasn't any way to be able to do the psilocybin work with them. I think people really need to become more proactive when they're given a diagnosis of end of life. And
Yeah, because like you mentioned earlier too, with cancer, a lot of times cancer and ailments, they come from your body telling you that there's something wrong. And it's usually from that deep emotional state. And if you start working on that first, before you start killing your body with chemotherapy, which I mean, again, Western medicine I think has a place, but if we work on the emotional stuff first, usually that helps clear things up. And I've seen it
I
time and time
completely
again.
agree. Completely agree. Yeah.
And the whole going to hospice, that really stems from our culture's fear of death. I mean,
Yeah.
we're just so afraid to die. We're so afraid to move on and let things go that we just keep grabbing on to whatever pill or treatment the hospital wants to give us, hoping for the next best thing. And it's hard because, I mean, my own father, he died a couple years ago and he was in the hospital. We kept hoping that he would come out of the coma, things would get better. But by the time it was like, no, this isn't going to happen. And we put him in hospice. He finally, 30 minutes of him getting into the hospice, he let go.
Yeah.
He was just like, I'm done. Thank you. You know, and I've been able to work with him on the ancestral side of things since then. So I've gotten my own closure, but a
Oh,
lot of people
good.
don't get that. You know, you don't, and that actually happened to me on a mushroom ceremony was I did a ceremony a couple months later and it was along this riverbank and he came across the river with him and my grandfather. We sat down, we talked everything out. He explained why what happened happened and a lot of the insights he gave me I didn't know about until I confirmed it later. And I was
Hmm.
like, all right, I'm good now, Dad. Thanks. For me that was the release I needed at that moment. And it was, we don't do that for people and that's what we
No,
really
we
need to bring
don't. We
back.
don't. We avoid it. We avoid talking about death, a lot of the taboo subjects. And the first client that I worked with was I drove down to Ashland, which was 5 hours, terminal for pancreatic cancer, and went into the service center. And during the journey, the colostomy bag came open and they were extremely embarrassed. It wasn't a big deal for the service center, but if we would have been allowed to do that in their home, it would have reduced some of that stress for the person that I was sitting with. And
Yeah, I think that needs to become a thing more. Just like, it's baby steps, right? I mean, we just now got licensed in one state. Hopefully it'll branch out. There's a lot more people talking about it now. There's a
yeah,
lot more people seeing benefits. There's actually a 60-minute
hmm, yeah,
report just a couple weeks ago where they were
hmm,
talking about veterans going down to Mexico and getting therapy and what they need. Like, there's no reason not to bring it here. I can go to any store now and get a gram, 5 grams, 10 grams of marijuana and take it home. I don't think you should necessarily do that for mushrooms, but I
hmm.
do think they need to be more accessible. I
I
do
do too.
think there needs to be more facilities like yourself or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like, people who are trained to work with others.
Mm-hmm.
We need more of that.
Mm-hmm. When it's interesting, I think because I'm licensed as a therapist, many people come to me because they've had years of working with therapists. So I really very rarely get people that go, I just want to come in and have a pleasant journey and see what I see. It's more like they have years of working on it. Traditional medications and therapies weren't working for them, so they're seeking something to help them open up. And really, that's essentially what psilocybin does.
Yeah. That's why, yeah, it's super important and we need more of it. There's a question there I wanted to ask, but now I'm forgetting what it is. So yeah, I mean, I guess with that lawsuit, do you have any timelines for it? Is it just starting? Has it been going on for a while? Like, how's that looking?
I think we've been working on it almost a year. But because I haven't been able to get a client that I can work with yet, that's what we're really waiting for. We keep putting the word out there, and there are other facilitators that are part of the lawsuit too that could work with it. It doesn't have to be just me.
Yeah.
That's what we need to provide to show the state, this, which is doing a really good job with the regulations of it, but it's something they need to see first.
Yeah, and understand why it's an issue if, I mean, if you're on your deathbed and you have a doctor's, verification that you don't have much longer to live, what does it matter at this point what the person does or doesn't do with their body?
Right.
Like there should be no reason for it whatsoever. We're allowing people to basically kill themselves. I think in Canada, they're letting people do end of life depending on their prognosis. Like, just let them have a mushroom and see how it goes for them. Like,
Yeah.
it shouldn't matter at that point.
Yeah, they actually have a program in Canada that's called SAP, which means a special advisory or to be able to prescribe it
Nice.
for end of life or PTSD or depression and anxiety. And I feel like that's kind of the model that Oregon should be moving towards. So it would probably require people to be certified. Like there's a SAP certification in Canada that will allow that.
And with the organ certification, do you have to be a licensed therapist first before you take it, or how does that work?
No, you don't. You don't. And I think that's wonderful, and I think it should be like that because a lot of people from underground that have worked with people for many years have been able to get licensed as a facilitator through that. However, there's a lot of fear with people that don't have experience working with trauma or the anxiety or the depression that could come up in it. So many people have become have gotten the certification, but they haven't become licensed because they don't know how to work with that or manage that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a interesting dilemma too for like, like someone like myself. I've been working with clients and doing the shamanic way of clearing and stuff like that. And there is some talk therapy, I guess, to a point, but a lot of it is we're working on your main issue, what you want to release, what you want to let go, and then we clear it out of your energetic field. And
Mm-hmm.
then mixing that with, plant medicine, it's a very powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see the need, at least for now, of having that Western mindset with the more therapist trained and then moving into the psilocybin. And I think at some point there might even be like a merging of all three.
I do too. I do too. Yeah, yeah, very much.
'Cause-
I have a poem that I read for clients, and would it be okay if I share it?
yeah, of course.
It's kind of what I share with when they're stirring their tea, when the tea is teeping, and it's a poem written by Jeff Foster from a book called "You Were Never Broken." And the reason I like to share it, it's very specific about trauma. I don't imagine that there's anybody living right now that hasn't experienced some form of trauma. Gabor Mate talks about trauma with a big T, which would be PTSD as a veteran or seeing a parent kill themselves in front of you. But there's also all kinds of small compounded traumas, like we talked about, like a child growing up not feeling seen and heard. And COVID has been traumatic. What's happening politically in this country can be very traumatic for people. What's happening in the Middle East with the wars is traumatic. And I think that because people don't really go in and explore their trauma because society says it's such a bad thing, that it just festers and it continues. And I feel like what's happening in the Middle East is two cultures that have had multi generational traumas and genocides,
Mhm.
and they're responding. It's a trauma response, taking it out on each other because the cultures are not allowing people to go in there and saying, this is really damaging. I really need to see how this affected me. The title of this poem is called The Courage to Stop Running. Trauma is invisible force that keeps us running, restless, in pursuit of some intangible goal, caught up in some unnecessary activity, addiction, compulsions, distractions, makes us escape into thinking, makes the body feel unsafe, makes a present moment into an enemy. If we slow down, if we stop, if we rest, if we simply do nothing, then we will have to face ourselves. We will have to face the buried feelings, all the shit we've been running from, all the darkness, the gunk, the muck, the loneliness, the aches and the boredom, the night and the emptiness. Trauma says run. Trauma says do not stop. Trauma says just keep going. Trauma says stopping is unsafe. We start by proving to ourselves that it is safe to rest, safe to be still, safe to do nothing just for a moment, safe to think our thoughts and feel our feelings and not fix the moment in any way. We can begin one moment at a time to digest all the things inside. Stay with sadness for a moment longer. Be present with our joy or shame for an instant more. Breathe into our anxiety instead of running from it. Become curious about our discomfort instead of distracting ourselves with unnecessary food, drink, cleaning, drugs, sex, shopping, internet, thinking, talking, overworking, yoga, seeking, more thinking, rumination, fantasy, and false hope. We can challenge a core story of the heart of trauma that the present moment is unsafe, that the body is somehow working against us, that feelings, sensations, and thoughts are dangerous. The stillness and silence equals non-existence and death, and that we have to do something in order to be worthy and loved and whole. It takes courage to stop running. It takes courage to lean into the storm. It takes courage to touch the darkness inside with the infinite light of our curious attention. It takes courage to break the addiction to futures and be present and breathe and not know. And then I would say to the client, it takes courage for you to come here today. It takes courage for you to prepare for this, to prepare for it, to set your intention, to come here from wherever you came from the East Coast to do this, to sit with me, to sit with an unknown, to face an unknown, and to allow yourself to go in the darkness and find the answers that you're seeking.
That's well said. It's very true because yeah, like you said, it's perceived trauma, what we consider trauma. It's we're afraid to look at the trauma, but we need to in order to grow. And
Yeah.
that's our society wants us to only look at the good things, only think of what's the positive stuff. And we need to look at the darkness. We need to look at what happened, not relive it. My teacher says, have the feelings, but don't get stuck in the emotions.
Right. To be of the world, but not in it.
Yeah. And just realize what's going on, but don't let it tie you down. And yeah, and if we get out of that victim triangle, like you're mentioning in the Middle East, it's, well, why are you fighting? Well, we're doing this because they did this to us. Well, why did they do that? Well, because they did this to us. And it's just this constant back and forth.
Yeah.
And we see
Yeah.
that in family dynamics too. My dad
Mm-hmm.
did this. Well, you did this. Well, I did this. And we don't get out of it. We don't break the cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes breaking those cycles is the bigger part to do.
And many people, when they're talking about it, they often say, well, it's always been like that.
Yep.
That's the way it is. Well, it's not working for you. It's dysfunctional for you and you're not happy with it. Who's going to change that?
Yep. Yeah, that's that taking that responsibility leg now. It's you've identified the problem, you see what's really going on, and unfortunately, sometimes that means letting go of the people that did things to you, even if they're family, until they're ready to come to you. And me personally, I tell people, it's like, I don't expect you to forgive at this moment. That's up to you when you want to do that. But it's letting it go so that you can move forward. That doesn't mean you're forgiving. That means you're just letting it go now so that you can take the next step.
Yeah, 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 beautiful. Take the next step to support yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes that means having to validate yourself, giving yourself a good a boy, patting yourself in the back and saying, you did good with that. You did better.
Yep.
Instead of going back to, oh, why did you do that? How, all of that self-defeating thought, that what if, going into what if land and spending time in there. And all of those are trauma responses.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll tell people, like, before you go to bed, just find one thing that you feel you did good today. Even if it was just breathing and staying
Yeah,
alive, you
yeah,
did that. Like you're still here. So
yeah.
what's the next thing you can do tomorrow? Maybe
Perfect.
it's, I don't know, you've been wanting to go to school and you finally started looking on websites for college.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you did. That's fine. You don't need to sign up, enroll, and do all these things in one day. It's, baby steps. It's like the Bill Murray movie where he's talking about baby steps. He's like, just do the
Mhm.
little things and get you where you need to get.
Yeah.
Over time, those steps will be this huge journey that you've never thought was possible because you started with the 1 foot.
Hmm.
Even if that's just getting up and making your bed in the morning, that's sometimes
Yes.
all we can do.
Yeah. Especially if you're dealing with depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finding the
Ernie,
love.
one of the things I like to share with you is that I have worked with a shaman with groups at one of the centers.
Nice.
And we actually did a workshop together. It was called Dumbledore Talks Mushrooms, Science Meets Magic. And it was titled that because in one of my sessions that I was working with a client, they kept lifting their blindfold up and looking at me and started laughing and going back in. And then later in integration, I said, "What was that about? What was going on?" And they said, "Oh, you were Dumbledore for me." So, so and of course, he was right. In some reality, I was Dumbledore for him. But so we use that as a title. But the way that we work it is we talk about the efficacy of the work and how the treatment works in Oregon. And then the shaman leads them through a shamanic journey with rattle and drum to meet the spirit of psilocybin and
Nice.
to see if there's a message from the mushroom to psilocybin and the mycelium, to see if there's a message from it and to see if they should be working with the medicine to start creating that. And it's been really successful.
Nice. Yeah, but like, do you guys do that on the regular? That'd be an interesting one to go down there and see too.
Well, we could, we've done it twice with two different groups.
Okay.
We actually presented the workshop 4 times, but actually held the group twice now. So
Nice. I would definitely be interested in seeing that one because yeah, I've met my version of the spirit of the mushroom. I'm sure it might look different for everybody to a point, but
hopefully,
eh. But he showed up to me and I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. All right, cool. You
yeah,
know, but yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting thing to do, and I definitely recommend people who are ready to really think about doing this type of work. Taking that extra step, reaching out to yourself or someone else like you in Oregon, and actually, if you truly want to address healing, I mean, even my way works to a point, but plant medicine has always been a lot faster in my experience for people. It's a lot more intuitive. It's a lot of times it's one session and you're done. My way, again, we work on clearing imprints of the trauma out of the energetic field, and it works. It works great. I work with people all the time, people with PTSD, but there's nothing in comparison to working with the plant medicine. Like, I'm not even going to pretend like I can compare.
I would like to suggest that it works because people are going in there; they're not avoiding it.
Exactly.
You're creating a safe environment and encouraging them to go in there,
Yeah.
and that's what people need. Society discourages us from looking at that and dwelling on it. And
Yeah, and that goes back to that point of, you shouldn't have anything bad happening because, buy this product and everything will be fine. Take this pill and you'll forget all about your troubles. Well, you want to be happy, take this and then go buy this car that puts you in $50,000 worth of debt, no problem. While you're working at McDonald's trying to figure things out.
what society teaches us to look for things outside of ourselves to fix ourselves,
Yep.
to complete ourselves, or make us feel whole, or to fill that void. And all the answers are inside. And psilocybin helps people see that.
Yeah, and that connection, like you mentioned, especially do you ever do ceremonies outside or is it always inside?
Unfortunately, it has to be in the treatment centers.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because there's something to that extra side of being outside and
definitely.
like you'll be walking and then you'll look down and you'll just like zoom in on the tiniest little bug and you'll know everything about that bug and what he's doing and how he's helping the world and his part that he plays. And then you'll be looking at the trees and watching them breathe and you just that true sense of connection to everything around you is just amazing outside.
Well, and that can happen inside too. With my ketamine journey, I felt like everything was part of me. I felt the vibration of the walls, and I felt like there was an energy inside man made things.
Hmm.
And it kind of makes sense that there would be because it was created.
Yeah. And that's that animist perspective too. Like everything has its own energy, everything has its purpose. And we're all connected one way or the other. And with the shamanic view is we have the plant and stone people,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
the tree people or the tall tree people, they teach us a lot, but the stone people, they have been here the longest. They're the ones who really keep record of everything. And when you look at technology, they're in everything, all the minerals, you know,
Yeah.
it's
And in us.
yes, exactly. Yeah, we have lots of minerals in us too.
I have guides that I work with in my journeys. The clients usually aren't aware of them unless it shows up for them. But Bear is a huge one of mine, and Bear is introspective and going in. And I also work with Hummingbird, which is joy. And one day I worked with a client who wanted to return to their childhood joy. They've been missing that. And they laughed for 6 hours. And I was very aware that Hummingbird was part of there too. And in the journey with us. And I didn't share that with the client, but I also work with Crow. And Crow, for me, the in the medicine card symbolizes natural law.
Hmm.
But I've also understood or come to understand recently that can symbolize becoming your authentic self, calling you to become your authentic self and reminding that. And I also work with White Dragon, which is new for me, but White Dragon holds this space and keeps it calm and
Nice.
sets the environment. And I'm aware of these and I call them in, but the clients aren't aware that I'm doing that because for some people they're not into that yet, or they haven't evolved into that, or they're not aware of it. Or I've also worked with devout Christians who have come in and given prayers to the medicine, thanking God for bringing this to them, and they've had very successful journeys because of that.
Yeah, and I
I
think
use,
there's a place for both. There's no reason to separate the two at all.
oh, oh. I usually encourage people to set up their own ritual too, to bring in things to remind them of the journey, to absorb the energy of the journey so they can take that home with them and have it be part of their environment when they get returned to where they live. And
Nice. Yeah, we use the or I use a lot. I have my own power animals. Like one of my main one is monkey, but then through my own training, through our medicine wheel, we have four archetypes. So we have the snake in the south, which is, you know, for that physical release, and we have the jaguar, which helps with the emotions. And it's funny you mentioned the hummingbird. So the hummingbirds are north direction, and the hummingbird helps you like see things at a spirit level. And it's also connecting with the ancestors and our lineage in the north direction. And then in the east, we use the eagle or the condor
mm,
because those are the big animal, the big birds on both continents. And each one of them brings something to the table. And I've had that happen too, where I'm working on it with a client and we're doing some clearing, just sitting there with her or him, and you know, the snake might show up and wrap around, and then the client will be like, I feel like there's a snake on me. I'm like, yeah, it's cool, don't worry about it. It's here to help. You know, or the same thing, I've had clients see a hummingbird. I'm like, yeah,
mhm.
hummingbird's here to help. You know, you just sometimes people are intuitive enough, or their own power animals will show up. You know, I've
Yeah,
worked with clients and you know, a bear will show up and they're like, I feel like there's a bear in the room. I'm like, yeah, that's your power animal, and we're gonna get to that next. Like, and I'll help you communicate with it now and
yeah,
work with it from there on. Like
yeah.
all these archetypes are here to help us. We just need to be more receptive.
And aware of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's and the same with religion because it's I want to touch on that a little bit because I've worked with clients who are like, well, you know, I was taught this is the devil's work, this and that, and it's they go together. I mean, if we want to believe that Jesus was a hands-on healer and he did all these amazing things, why can't we have both? You know, if a God can create him, why can't they also give us access to do some of the same thing? I'm not saying I can turn water into wine, but as energy workers, we can also help you with moving energy around too.
Yes.
You know, and connecting with the plants. Like you said, well, plants are medicine. There's a saying that the plant you need for medicine is usually growing within like 10 feet of your door. You know, it's like, and one example I give is we bought this house and my son started having nightmares, and we have a lemon balm just growing right there, right in front of the house. You know, turn that into some lemon balm team. Now he's having, you know, he would go to sleep easier. Or
Wow.
chickweed, you pull chickweed out of the ground, mash it up, chew it a little bit. That helps with your cuts and stuff.
Hmm.
You know, all
Hmm.
these little plants are just growing everywhere. we have pine trees. Using the pine is really good for protection,
Mhm.
making medicine water that way. It's they're all here to help. We just have
Yeah,
to reach out.
yeah. People need to be reconnected to remembering that. And for many people, there is a genetic memory. I've sat with clients before in their journey, and in the middle of their journey, they'll go, "I've been here before. I know this." It's really revalidating for many people.
Nice. And with that, I guess before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about working with plant medicine or your journey in general, or any other, I guess, tips or advice you'd give to somebody?
Well, I'd just like to say that if anybody's interested, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to them. And no fees. I don't charge any fees for just consultation or advice or direction. And they don't even have to consider working with me. But if they have questions about it for themselves, definitely I'd be happy to help.
Nice. And yeah, we'll put all your links to your website and any emails or extra contact information you want people to have. We'll make sure that's in the show notes as well.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate you doing this and making people aware, waking people up.
No, I appreciate you coming on. It's nice to get someone who can, again, legally talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I had a guy who's in South America, he does ayahuasca, but that's a big investment of a trip too, trying to take time to go down there. Having something more in our backyard is a great thing, and I think we need more of it, regardless of
Mhm,
where they go. But if people are concerned and really want to have, the licenses and stuff like that, and the knowledge that these people are trained, they should be working with yourself and people in your area up there.
mhm. I agree. It's not inexpensive. It's cheaper than going to a foreign country to do it. But my rates, I keep them low because it's not about the money for me. It's about raising the collective consciousness and service center that has some of the lowest rates in the state. So,
You're cutting off a little bit at the end.
oh, sorry,
Oh yeah.
intentionally working with lower rates and in service centers. So,
Okay. And where exactly are you located? Was it
and,
Portland or Portland? Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's like a 2 hour trip for me. I might have to swing down and hang out, check it
No,
out.
that'd be great. I would love to give a tour of the center, and so we
Nice.
could definitely talk more about it. And if you wanted to experience the whole thing, I would be happy to sit with you with no fees. So
Nice.
just because I think the more people know about this, the more they can share it and share especially with people that really need it.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's
And
other people I try to focus with too. Like I said, I work a lot with vets and people with PTSD, and it's like I'm not allowed to do this, but I can point you in the right direction. It's like people need to know where to go. That's the important thing.
and a lot of the people that I work with are my age or even older, and are very fearful of doing it underground because
Mhm.
they're afraid they're going to. One of them said, "I'd be afraid of being in my journey and being in there and then having the police bust in on us." So having it legalized and licensed is really beneficial and reduces a lot of the anxiety of going into the journey for many people.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, man. This has been fun.
Thank
And
you.
I hope people reach out to you. Again, I'll put all your contact information in the show notes so that people can reach out. And I
Thank
hope they
you.
do. Like people need to do this work and people need to experience this work.
Yeah,
And we need more
yeah.
people like you. And hopefully that lawsuit gets going better for you guys and you guys can start bringing this to the hospice centers because
Yeah.
if anything, just allowing people to realize they don't need to be afraid and to learn to come to terms. And maybe they'll even come to the realization of doing their final, whatever they need to say to whoever they need to say it to, and realizing that, okay, it's going to be all right. And there might be some comfort for the family too,
Yeah, yeah.
realizing that their grandparents aren't afraid or everything's going to be fine. Some people have that with religion, but if you're not religious, maybe knowing there's another side out there can be
Mhm.
helpful to them and seeing it.
One of the people that I work with a lot around that is Stephen Jenkinson. Are you familiar with his work with Die Wise?
He sounds familiar, but I'm not 100% sure.
There's a documentary called Die Wise, and he essentially talks about breaking the stigma of talking about death,
Okay.
and how to be able to pass gracefully and to inspire the generations that you leave behind with the way that you pass. And there's also a couple of movies out right now that I'd recommend. They're Dosed movies. Have you seen Dosed 1 and
Yes.
Dosed 2?
I've seen one.
Yeah, one of them works with addiction, a woman with addiction, getting off of her addiction with the use of psilocybin, and another one works with talks about a woman who has terminal cancer diagnosis, and she does psilocybin, switches her attitude about it, and then does heavy doses of cannabis, and she's in remission now because of that.
Nice.
So
Yeah, a lot of it's just that built up trauma within our body, and our body's just telling us to release it, and then it gives us these symptoms. And there's that saying, it's not disease, but it's dis-ease. Your body's out of ease.
that's what I always use: dis-ease. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And then you get sick, and then you get more out of whack because you're not addressing it, and now you're getting more fearful. And a lot of these things can be healed with our own way of thinking. Not everything. I mean, there are some issues out there that we do need Western medicine for, but a lot of it, if we start early enough, we might never even have these problems. Right. All right. So again, yeah, I appreciate your time, man. I'll put all the information in the show notes, and then yeah, it was nice
Thank
talking.
you. Thank you. No, thank you so much for doing this work. It's so important.
Appreciate it. And you as well. You're more important than I am. You're doing the real work.
Uh, mm.